The chamber of the Galactic Council was built to impress and intimidate. It was a massive circular hall, its walls made of smooth black stone that shimmered under soft golden lights. Dozens of raised platforms surrounded the center, each occupied by the ruling representatives of a different alien species. Their eyes, whether they were wide, narrow, compound, or glowing, were all fixed on one man standing alone on the speaking floor. Captain Elias Mercer felt the weight of those stares like invisible chains. He was not just here for himself. He stood for all of humanity, and every word spoken against him was a judgment on his entire species. The air was heavy with tension. A low hum of alien voices echoed in the chamber, growing louder until the Grand Arbiter of the Council raised one clawed hand for silence. Her long, glassy carapace reflected the light like a blade. When she spoke, her voice carried a sharp finality. The Council finds the human species guilty of dangerous unpredictability, defiance of established law, and repeated interference in interstellar affairs. You are hereby exiled from all Council territories. Elias clenched his jaw, but his face remained calm. Inside, his heart pounded. He knew this day might come, but hearing the words out loud was still like being struck. Around the chamber, alien representatives murmured in agreement. Some looked satisfied. Others looked uneasy, as if they feared what humans might do next. A tall, thin alien with translucent skin leaned forward on his platform and said in a voice dripping with disdain, "We gave your kind a seat at this table. You repay us with chaos. You will not trouble us again." Elias's fingers tightened around the edge of the podium. "We have defended this galaxy," he said, his voice steady but forceful. "We have bled for worlds that were not our own, and this is the thanks we get?" The words echoed, but no one answered. The Grand Arbiter's expression didn't change. Her many-faceted eyes blinked slowly, like shutters closing. "Your trade rights are revoked," she continued. "All human colonies within Council jurisdiction must withdraw within 1 standard month. Your fleets will be monitored. Any violation will be treated as an act of war." The final strike came with her last sentence. "You are no longer a recognized member of the Galactic Council. This decision is final." Elias felt the floor beneath him tilt, not literally, but in the way his life and everything humanity had built shifted in a single moment. He could see the victory in the eyes of certain species, those who had always feared or hated humans. He also saw something else in others, pity, maybe even regret. But pity wasn't what humanity needed now. 2 guards in silver armor, each standing over 2 meters tall, approached to escort him out. Elias gave a small nod and stepped back, his boots making a soft metallic sound on the polished floor. As he walked through the great doors, he kept his head high. The voices of the Council faded behind him, replaced by the low, steady thrum of his own thoughts. The verdict was final. Yes, but it was not the end. The shuttle ride back to the human embassy ship was silent. His crew, 2 men and 1 woman, waited for him inside, their faces tight with anger. Lieutenant Mara spoke first. "They actually did it." Her voice shook. "They threw us out like criminals. They think they've stripped us of everything." Elias replied quietly, lowering himself into a seat. "They've only freed us from their chains." The ship undocked from the station, and through the viewport, Elias watched the sprawling structure of the Galactic Council grow smaller. It had always been a symbol of power, a place where the great civilizations of the galaxy gathered. Now, to him, it looked like a prison he'd just walked out of. On the journey back to Earth, the mood among the crew and passengers shifted. The shock of exile began to burn away, replaced by anger, then by something more dangerous: resolve. In the corridors of the ship, people spoke in hushed voices. Ideas were exchanged. Questions rose. If the Council had closed its doors, why not open others? Why not explore places they had never been allowed to go? Why not claim what the Council had ignored or deemed too dangerous? Elias walked the halls and listened. He didn't have to plant the seed, it was already growing. Humanity had always been restless, always pushing past boundaries, and the Council's rejection was not a cage. It was a spark. When they finally reached Earth, news of the exile spread like fire. The streets of every major city filled with voices, some outraged, others defiant. Politicians made speeches condemning the Council's decision. Scientists talked about unregulated research. Military leaders spoke in quiet, guarded meetings about the opportunities that came with freedom from Council oversight. Ordinary people began volunteering for off-world expeditions, eager to prove that humanity would not fade into the shadows. Elias stood before the United Earth Assembly, the sea of faces watching him with a mixture of hope and fury. "We have been told we are dangerous," he said, his voice carrying through the grand chamber. "And maybe we are, but we are dangerous to those who would keep us small. They thought exile would break us. Instead, it will make us unstoppable. We will go where they fear to go. We will build where they will not. And when they look to the stars, they will see us, not as outcasts, but as the ones who dared." The assembly erupted in applause, and Elias knew it was not just noise. It was the sound of a decision. Humanity had been cast out, but they would not stay in the dark. The council had taken their seat at the table, but in return, humanity would take the stars themselves. And deep down, Elias believed the council would come to regret this day more than any other in their history. The months after the exile were filled with movement, planning, and a strange kind of excitement. Earth cities buzzed with new projects, secret meetings, and engineering teams working day and night. Without the Galactic Council watching, the chains that had slowed human progress were gone. For decades, certain technologies had been banned, too risky, too unstable, or too disruptive. But now those rules no longer mattered. In hidden laboratories beneath Luna's surface, deep in the orbital shipyards above Mars, and inside massive underwater facilities on Earth, scientists worked on something that had been whispered about for years but never revealed to the public: the Orion Drive. The Orion Drive was humanity's answer to the galaxy's obsession with caution. While Council ships crawled from one star to another using old, safe hyperlane routes, the Orion Drive promised to cut travel time by a third and take ships into regions the Council had declared unreachable. It was fast, risky, and untested on a large scale, but it was theirs. And now, with exile hanging over them, they had nothing to lose. When the day came to test it, the launch was not broadcast to the galaxy. Only a handful of people knew. The prototype ship Vanguard sat in orbit above Mars, its sleek silver hull reflecting the crimson planet below. Inside the bridge, Captain Elias Mercer stood with the engineering chief, Dr. Alina Voss. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp with anticipation. "Once we make the jump, there's no going back. The Council has no record of these coordinates. We'll be on our own." "That's the point," Elias said, giving the order to begin. The hum of the engines rose, and the entire ship seemed to tense like a runner waiting for the starting gun. Then, with a soundless burst, the stars outside blurred into streams of light. The jump lasted only seconds, but when the ship emerged, they were no longer in familiar space. Before them stretched an endless black ocean dotted with new stars, systems no one had mapped, worlds no one had named. The test was a success. Within weeks, the Orion Drive was installed on more ships, and the first official human fleet, 5 vessels, was assembled. Each one carried not just soldiers or explorers, but entire communities: engineers, medics, scientists, builders, and farmers. This wasn't just a military expansion. It was the birth of a new wave of colonists ready to build fresh worlds from nothing. The departure from Earth was quiet, almost solemn. Families stood on launch platforms, watching their loved ones board the great ships. No one knew if they'd ever return. But instead of sadness, there was a deep pride in their eyes. They weren't fleeing, they were pioneering. When the fleet left Sol space, there were no council patrols to follow them, no alien diplomats to demand their destination. Every jump took them farther than humanity had ever gone. The first systems they reached were breathtaking. A blue giant star lit up a chain of icy planets, their frozen surfaces glimmering under strange auroras. A smaller system held a single green and gold world with vast plains of swaying crystal grass that sang when the wind passed through. One asteroid field shimmered like a floating treasure chest, its rocks laced with rare metals the Council had spent centuries hoarding. On each stop, the fleet recorded everything, mapping stars, scanning planets, and marking possible sites for colonies. Some worlds were too hostile to live on: oceans of acid, storms that never ended, skies filled with toxic gas. Others were perfect but untouched, waiting for life to arrive. And unlike the Council, which took decades to approve a single settlement, humans didn't wait. They set up outposts, installed life support systems, and began claiming these worlds as their own. Elias walked the corridors of his flagship, resolute, watching the people at work. Engineers ran cables and built fusion plants. Scientists studied alien flora. Farmers planted the first crops in hydroponic domes. These weren't just soldiers on a mission. They were dreamers, determined to make these places home. Every planet they settled felt like a small victory against the Council's arrogance. News of their progress spread faster than anyone expected. Traders, mercenaries, and refugees from distant systems began finding the human colonies, curious about the exiles who were moving faster than even the most daring alien explorers. Many came looking for trade, but some came to stay. No questions asked, no chains was the unspoken rule. Humanity was building something the Council couldn't, an open frontier where anyone willing to work could belong. The fleet kept moving. They jumped to systems the Council's star maps marked as unstable or unreachable. Many of these warnings proved to be exaggerations left in place to discourage exploration. Other times, the danger was real. Rogue asteroids, collapsing stars, violent electromagnetic storms, but humans learned to adapt quickly. They designed shielding against radiation surges, charted safe paths through asteroid belts, and used the Orion Drive's speed to outrun disasters. One of the most memorable moments came when the fleet entered the Miros Cloud, a dense region of colorful cosmic dust that hid an uncharted binary star system. The dust was so thick that sensors struggled, forcing navigators to rely on instinct and half-blind guesses. In that swirling haze, the ships looked like silver fish swimming through a glowing ocean. When they finally emerged, they found themselves before a planet with vast silver seas and islands shaped like spirals. Dr. Voss was the first to speak. "If this is exile," she said softly, "then I hope they never take us back." By the time the fleet had been gone from Earth for a year, humanity had claimed more new systems than in the entire century under Council rule. The Orion Drive was no longer a secret. It was a legend whispered in smugglers' bars and frontier markets. Council patrols occasionally tried to track the human ships, but they were always a step too slow. Every time the Council thought they'd found a way to block the humans' path, the fleet simply leapt into another uncharted system and vanished again. Elias kept a private log of their journey. In it, he wrote not just the coordinates and discoveries, but the feeling of each place, the way a green dawn looked over a crystal desert, the sound of alien whales singing through the water of a warm ocean, the sight of a red sun setting behind a new settlement's first watchtower. To him, this was more than expansion. It was proof. Proof that exile hadn't crippled humanity. It had freed them to do what they did best, go farther, faster, and harder than anyone else dared. And with each new star they reached, Elias knew they were getting closer to something the Council would never be able to ignore. A human sphere so vast, so alive, and so powerful that even the galaxy's oldest powers would have to reckon with it. The Skira system was unlike anything the fleet had seen before. From a distance, its star looked pale and sickly, casting a dim green light over the planets. The sensors picked up signs of life on the third world, but they were weak. Faint energy readings, scattered heat signatures, and irregular communication signals. Most fleets would have ignored it, assuming it was just another dying world with nothing of value. But Elias ordered the fleet to approach. Something about those scattered signals felt desperate. As the ships entered orbit, the surface told a grim story. The cities below were shattered, their buildings broken and blackened. Vast stretches of land were covered in dust and ash, and the seas were tinged a dull gray. There were no signs of thriving culture, only survivors clinging to what was left. Dr. Voss confirmed what the scan suggested. This world had suffered centuries of war, its population reduced to fragments. The Galactic Council had classified the inhabitants, the Rill, as a lost cause decades ago and withdrawn all aid. From the viewport, Elias saw movement, clusters of insect-like figures scurrying between the ruins. Their bodies were slender but armored, with 4 legs and 2 grasping arms, their segmented eyes glinting in the dim light. They were clearly struggling to rebuild, but their tools were primitive and their infrastructure nearly gone. "We land," Elias said. "Bring medics, engineers, and enough supplies to last a month. If they're alive, we talk." When the first human landing teams stepped onto the cracked soil, the Rill reacted with a mix of fear and hostility. Groups of them emerged from hiding, armed with crude spears and scavenged energy rifles. Their language was sharp and clicking, difficult to understand at first. The human translators tried to open dialogue, but the real leader, a tall figure with deep green markings along his exoskeleton, refused to lower his weapon. "Why are you here?" the translator relayed. "The council abandoned us. Leave before you do the same." Uh, Elias stepped forward, lowering his own weapon to show he meant no harm. "We're not here for the council," he said slowly, making sure the translator caught every word. "We were cast out too, but we can help if you let us." There was a long pause, broken only by the wind whistling through the ruins. Finally, the leader gave a short, hesitant nod. The first days were tense. The Rill watched every human move, expecting betrayal. But actions spoke louder than words. Human engineers began repairing water purification systems that hadn't worked in years. Medics set up mobile clinics and treated injuries the Rill had lived with for decades. Farmers from the fleet taught them how to build hydroponic gardens inside their surviving buildings, producing fresh food for the first time in a generation. Slowly, the guarded stares turned into cautious curiosity. One evening, Elias was invited to share a meal with the Rill leader, whose name translated roughly to Tavar. They sat on opposite sides of a low metal table, the air filled with the scent of roasted grain and an earthy spice. Through the translator, Tavar admitted something surprising. "The council told us humans were dangerous, reckless. They said you would use us, then leave. Yet you fixed what they said could not be fixed." Elias only smiled faintly. "They were half right," he replied. "We are dangerous to those who give up on others." In return for the help, the Rill shared something invaluable: old star maps, passed down from before their wars began. Many of these maps showed hidden trade routes, forgotten colonies, and systems far beyond the Council's reach. Some marked places the Council didn't even know existed. Elias knew instantly how important they were. With these maps, humanity could bypass Council-controlled space entirely and move into regions no one had claimed. But it wasn't just about the maps. The alliance with the Rill carried a deeper meaning. Word spread quickly through fringe space about what had happened in Sira. Refugees, smugglers, and mercenaries who heard the story began seeking out the human fleet. "The humans helped the dying Rill," they said in docking bays and backroom bars. "They don't care about the Council's rules. They care about results." Over the next few months, human and Rill teams worked side by side. Together, they rebuilt parts of the main city, restored power to long-dead grids, and even constructed a small spaceport where trade ships could dock safely. For the first time in centuries, the Rill saw real progress. Children who had grown up in rubble began playing in clean, open streets. Farmers harvested their first full crops in living memory. Elias knew they couldn't stay forever. The fleet still had to push outward. But he made sure the Rill had what they needed to keep going. He left them with fusion generators, food production systems, medical supplies, and a small squadron of armed drones for defense. Before the fleet departed, Tavar met Elias on the landing platform. The Rill leader placed one clawed hand against Elias's chest, a gesture of deep respect in their culture. "If ever you call, we will come," Tavar said through the translator. As the ships lifted off, Elias stood on the bridge watching the ruined planet grow smaller on the view screen. It was still scarred, still recovering, but it no longer looked like a lost cause. And now, humanity had an ally who owed them more than words. They owed them survival. The fleet's next jump would take them deeper into unclaimed space, guided by the ancient maps of the Rill. Every crew member felt the change. They weren't just wandering exiles anymore. They had a reputation, one that would travel faster than their ships. Humanity was the species that showed up when everyone else turned away. That kind of reputation was worth more than any council membership, and Elias intended to use it. By the time the fleet reached the edge of the next system, the comm channels were already alive with incoming messages from other worlds. Strangers wanted to meet them. Traders wanted to work with them. Outcasts wanted to join them. The Syra mission had done more than save a dying race. It had lit a signal fire in the dark, one that told the galaxy that humans were not done yet. In less than 10 years after exile, the change was impossible to ignore. The human fleet had grown from a handful of ships into an armada that stretched across star maps like a living network. But it wasn't just humans anymore. The real were there, their ships now repaired and faster than they had been in centuries. They brought with them warriors, traders, and scouts who knew the shadow routes through dangerous space. Behind them came others, species the Galactic Council had ignored or abandoned. Some were refugees from destroyed worlds, others were criminals escaping execution, and some were simply wanderers looking for a place where they could belong. Humanity welcomed them all, as long as they were willing to work and defend their new home. It started small. A few mixed species settlements appeared on unclaimed planets, where human engineers worked beside alien builders. At first, the languages were a mess, the cultures clashed, and fights broke out over the simplest things like food rations or who had the right to farm certain land. But humans had learned to adapt quickly. They established a rule that everyone could understand: contribute or leave. It didn't matter where you came from or what you had done before. If you could build, trade, heal, or fight, you had a place in the growing community. They called it the Outer Alliance. The name spread from docking bay chatter to official transmissions, and soon it became a banner under which dozens of species gathered. It wasn't like the Galactic Council, where every decision required endless debates and political deals. In the Alliance, decisions were made fast. If a colony needed defenses, ships were dispatched within days, not years. If a trade route was under threat, fleets were moved before pirates could strike twice. Trade flourished in a way no one had predicted. Outcasts had access to rare resources the Council had hoarded for centuries: metals from uncharted asteroid belts, medicines made from plants on forgotten worlds, and energy crystals mined in places most ships wouldn't dare enter. The Alliance built massive trade hubs on frontier planets, where goods and information changed hands at dizzying speed. Human merchants quickly learned alien customs, bargaining in markets filled with scents of spices no one could name, and tools no council trader had ever seen. But trade was only part of the story. The military force of the Outer Alliance grew just as quickly. What had started as a few human warships became a mixed fleet with alien fighters, stealth corvettes, and massive cargo carriers armed to the teeth. Many of the soldiers were former mercenaries or deserters from council forces, drawn by the promise of freedom and a fair share of whatever they earned. The Alliance didn't have a central command in the traditional sense. Fleet captains had authority in their regions, but they all answered to a council of leaders, including Elias and representatives from the largest allied species. This structure made them unpredictable. The Galactic Council couldn't understand how a group without strict control could function so effectively. But the truth was simple. The Alliance worked because its members wanted it to work. They had no other place to go, so they fought for the home they had built. On the planet Vera, one of the largest Alliance settlements, the streets were lined with buildings built in a dozen architectural styles. Human steel structures stood beside rill spire towers, and further down, low domed houses made from volcanic stone sheltered a desert-born species called the Thererin. Markets overflowed with trade goods, fruit from distant worlds, weapons of alien design, fabrics that shimmered like liquid. Children of mixed heritage played together in the open squares, their laughter carrying over the noise of the crowd. Elias often walked these streets when he needed to remind himself of what they were fighting for. To him, the Alliance wasn't just ships and territory. It was proof that cooperation without chains was possible. He knew they weren't perfect. Fights still broke out in the bars, smugglers still bent the rules, but compared to the stagnant, rule-choked council, the Alliance was alive. One evening, Elias met with the other leaders aboard the Resolute. Around the table sat Tavar of the Real, Captain Drellin of the Theron, and two human commanders, Mara and Jace. They discussed expansion, protection of trade routes, and the growing need for more colonists to settle the outer systems. The more worlds we claim, the harder it will be for the Council to push us back, Mara said. Tavar's mandibles clicked in agreement. And the more species we welcome, the harder it will be for them to attack us without making enemies of their own. They decided to formalize the Alliance's defense network, stations in key systems, heavily armed and able to respond to threats within hours. Supply lines would be reinforced, and recruitment drives would begin on every world. Within months, the results were clear. New colonies popped up across the frontier, each connected to the others through trade, communication, and mutual defense. The Council began to notice. Reports reached Elias that Council patrols had been spotted shadowing Alliance trade convoys, scanning ships and recording flight paths. Instead of hiding, the Alliance ships moved in larger, better armed groups. They sent a clear message. If the Council wanted to stop them, they'd have to fight for it. Every new world the Alliance claimed made that fight less likely. The Council was slow, bound by its own laws and endless political arguments. The Alliance, meanwhile, could settle a planet, build defenses, and have it fully supplied before the Council even finished debating whether they were a threat. Elias stood in the command center of the Resolute, looking at the updated star map. The Alliance's territory now stretched across entire sectors, its worlds marked in gold. This, he thought, is what exile gave us. They had turned humiliation into strength, and isolation into a network of allies who had once been enemies. He knew there would be a reckoning eventually. The Council would not allow them to grow forever, but for now, humanity and the Alliance were untouchable, and every day their ships pushed deeper into the unknown, and as long as they kept expanding, they could not be caged again. The first sign of trouble came from a small trading post on the edge of Alliance space. A merchant ship sent a scrambled transmission reporting that a group of unfamiliar warships had appeared near the border. They didn't attack, but they scanned every vessel and demanded to know who controlled the sector. The description matched no known pirate group. It matched the patrol ships of the Galactic Council. When the report reached Elias aboard the Resolute, he knew it meant only one thing. The Council had finally noticed how far the Outer Alliance had grown. For years, they had ignored the exile, assuming humans would fade into obscurity. Now the maps told a different story. The Alliance wasn't a handful of scattered colonies anymore. It was a connected, well-supplied network with its own trade routes, fleets, and allies. The Council's official warning arrived 3 days later. It came as a formal transmission, the kind they used when speaking to other governments. The voice of the Grand Arbiter filled the comm room, cold and clipped. The Outer Alliance is expanding into restricted zones under Galactic Council protection. You are to cease all expansion immediately and withdraw from these territories. Continued violations will be treated as hostile acts. Elias listened in silence, arms folded across his chest. Around him, the other Alliance leaders reacted with anger. Tavar's mandibles clicked sharply. Restricted zones? They abandoned those worlds centuries ago. Now they claim them again because we are making them thrive. Captain Drellin slammed his fist against the table. This is their fear talking. They see we are becoming too strong to ignore. When the message ended, the room fell quiet. All eyes turned to Elias. He knew what they were waiting for, permission to respond. We didn't build this to give it away, he said firmly. The Council has no authority here. They threw us out. They don't get to decide where we go now. Within hours, the warning was shared with every Alliance fleet. The reaction was the same everywhere. Laughter, then determination. Some captains sent back sarcastic replies to the Council, others ignored it entirely. The work of expansion continued without pause. Colonists still boarded transports for new worlds. Mining crews kept drilling into untouched asteroid belts. Traders kept running goods along the growing web of routes. The Council didn't send another message right away, but they didn't stay idle either. Reports started coming in of their patrols getting closer, shadowing Alliance convoys, and occasionally scanning their cargo. A few times, they tried to block certain wormhole gates, forcing ships to take longer routes. But the Orion Drive gave the Alliance an advantage. Their ships could make jumps to systems the Council couldn't reach as quickly. Every time the Council thought they'd trapped them, the Alliance simply appeared somewhere else. On the colony world of Eridon Prime, a place the Council had left uninhabited for centuries, settlers woke one morning to find 3 Council frigates in low orbit. Their commanders demanded to speak with the local authority. The colony leader, a human named Ray Colburn, stood in the middle of the landing field with a group of Ryle and Theron guards. She sent back a single sentence over the comms: "We have no interest in your laws." The frigates left after a tense standoff, but the message was clear. The Council was testing the Alliance's resolve. Elias called an emergency meeting of the leadership aboard the Resolute. The central star map showed clusters of red dots creeping closer to Alliance gold. "They're probing us," Mara said, pointing to the moving markers, "looking for weaknesses." Tavar leaned forward, his voice low and certain. "They will not find any, unless we hesitate." The decision was unanimous. They would not slow down. In fact, they would accelerate expansion into the very zones the Council had marked as restricted. It was a deliberate act of defiance, but also a calculated move. The more worlds they claimed now, the harder it would be for the Council to take them back later. Over the next months, fleets pushed into resource-rich systems the Council had ignored for decades. They built defensive stations near wormhole gates, armed with long-range rail cannons and shield generators. Colonies were supplied faster than ever, their landing pads busy with cargo ships bringing weapons, food, and construction materials. The Council, used to dealing with slow-moving civilizations, struggled to keep up. Their patrols would arrive at a world marked as unclaimed, only to find a fully operational settlement with its own defenses and trade routes already established. Official protests poured in, each one more frustrated than the last, but without a declaration of war, the Council's options were limited. On the frontier, life went on. Miners dug into mountains filled with rare metals. Farmers turned alien soil into fertile farmland. Markets bustled with traders from a dozen species. In the cantinas and mess halls, stories spread about the Council's warning. Most people laughed at it. Some wore it like a badge of honor, painting slogans like "restricted by whose order" on the sides of their ships. Still, Elias knew the Council's patience wouldn't last forever. They had been humiliated once when they cast out humanity and expected them to vanish. Now, every new star claimed by the Alliance was a reminder that their decision had backfired. The longer we grow, Elias thought as he studied the star charts, the more it will cost them to stop us. And that, he knew, was their greatest weapon, not just their ships or their technology, but the sheer fact that every day they existed, the harder it became for the Council to undo what exile had set in motion. The warning was not a leash. It was a sign the Council was already losing control, and Elias intended to make sure they never got it back. The first attack came without warning. In the Clerion Belt, a dense region of rocks and drifting ice, a human-operated mining station was busy extracting rare metals. Workers were going about their shifts, loading cargo ships and running the processing plants when the sensors detected 3 fast-approaching ships. At first, the station's crew assumed it was an Alliance patrol, but the ships bore the markings of the Galactic Council. Before anyone could send a full distress call, the warships opened fire. Explosions ripped through the station's outer hull, and within minutes, hundreds of miners and engineers were dead. The emergency signal that finally got out was short, jagged with static, and cut off midway. When it reached the Resolute, Elias was on the bridge. The moment he heard it, his face hardened. He didn't call for a meeting or ask for proof. He gave the order immediately. "Rally the nearest ships. We hit them back. Hard." Within hours, an Alliance fleet of 15 vessels dropped out of hyperspace on the edge of the Clerion Belt. They moved in quietly, their hulls blending into the shadows of the asteroids. The Council patrol, still in the area to secure what they had done, didn't realize what was coming until the first missile slammed into their lead ship. The battle was swift and brutal. The Alliance ships, smaller and faster, darted between the asteroids, using cover to get close before striking. Within minutes, the Council vessels were disabled or destroyed. There were no survivors left to carry the Council's version of events back home. That day marked the start of an undeclared war on the frontier. There were no formal declarations, no speeches, only sudden skirmishes, ambushes, and retaliations. The Council tried to paint the Alliance as aggressors, but it was their ships that had fired first. And now they had awakened something dangerous. The Council fleets were larger, heavily armed, and built for open battles in clear space. But they were slow, and their commanders relied on predictable tactics. The Alliance learned to use this against them. Instead of meeting them head-on, Alliance ships struck supply lines, intercepted cargo convoys, and hit fuel depots before vanishing into uncharted systems. Every victory brought more confidence. Every raid brought new recruits, captains from neutral worlds who saw that the Council could be beaten. the war was fought in shadows. One week, an Alliance task force would hit a Council listening post on the edge of a nebula, disabling it before reinforcements could arrive. The next, they would ambush a patrol guarding a wormhole gate, seizing control of it for weeks at a time. The Council responded with heavier patrols and blockade attempts, but these only spread their forces thinner. Elias made sure every attack had a purpose. If they struck a target, it was either to secure resources, protect a colony, or cut off the Council's reach. He refused to waste lives on reckless moves, and that discipline earned him the loyalty of not just humans, but many alien captains in the Alliance. They knew he wasn't after glory. He was after victory. On the colony world of Merrick's Hold, the Council tried a different tactic. Instead of attacking outright, they attempted to incite rebellion from within, sending agents to stir unrest among non-human settlers. But the Alliance was ready. Local leaders intercepted the agents, exposed their plan publicly, and sent them back to the Council in small escape pods with nothing but a recorded message. Your games won't work here. The incident became a rallying cry, proof that the Alliance was united no matter how different its members were. The Council's frustration grew. They began deploying larger fleets into contested areas, hoping to crush the Alliance with sheer numbers. But here too, the Orion Drive gave the Alliance the advantage. They could strike and retreat before the slower Council fleets could engage, forcing them to waste time chasing shadows. One of the most daring operations of this stage of the war happened in the Shattered Rings, a debris field left from a moon that had been destroyed centuries ago. A Council fleet was using the area as a staging point for attacks deeper into Alliance space. Elias ordered a strike team to slip through the debris under stealth, plant charges on the largest remaining ring segments, and detonate them once the Council ships were in position. When the explosion came, massive chunks of rock slammed into the Council vessels, crippling them before the Alliance ships even revealed themselves. The few surviving enemy ships limped away, leaving the area to the Alliance. But victories came at a cost. Alliance ships were damaged, and crews were lost in the fighting. Every funeral added weight to Elias's shoulders. In the quiet of his quarters, he studied the star maps, marking each system taken and each battle won. He knew the Council would not back down easily. For them, losing to the Alliance was more than a strategic setback. It was a humiliation. Yet the tide was turning. More and more, the Council was forced to divert resources from other parts of the galaxy just to contain the Alliance. This weakened their grip elsewhere, and in those neglected corners, new voices rose. Independent worlds began declaring they would no longer follow the Council's decrees. Some of these worlds reached out to the Alliance, offering resources and safe harbors in exchange for protection. Every alliance formed, every ship added to their fleet, and every new world claimed made it harder for the Council to erase them. The war wasn't won yet, but it was clear to everyone watching that the exiles were no longer prey. They were predators now, and the Council's vast power was starting to show cracks. For Elias, the message was simple. The Council had wanted to keep humanity and its allies in the dark corners of the galaxy. Instead, they had forced them into the open, sharpened by hardship, united by necessity, and ready to fight for every star they had claimed. The undeclared war was no longer just about survival. It was about proving to the galaxy that the Outer Alliance was here to stay. The Deveris Gate was more than just a wormhole. It was a key that linked two halves of the galaxy, allowing ships to cross what would otherwise take months in minutes. Whoever controlled the gate controlled trade, military movement, and the flow of resources between entire sectors. For the Outer Alliance, it was the lifeline connecting their eastern and western territories. For the Galactic Council, it was a target they could not resist. The attack began at dawn cycle. The first Alliance patrol near the gate picked up massive energy readings, too large for a simple patrol. Within minutes, the scanners confirmed it. An entire Council battle group was inbound, more than 30 ships strong, including carriers, destroyers, and a dreadnought. Their intent was obvious. They meant to take the gate and cut the Alliance in two. Elias was on the bridge of the Resolute when the report came in. His stomach tightened, but there was no hesitation in his voice. Signal all nearby fleets. Every ship that can move, move now. We hold that gate. Across the comm channels, the urgency spread. Captains abandoned secondary missions, trade convoys rerouted, and defense stations in nearby systems went on full alert. Within hours, a patchwork Alliance fleet was racing toward Deveris. When they arrived, the scale of the threat became clear. The gate itself hung in space like a giant ring of molten silver, its center swirling with the shifting colors of compressed space-time. Around it, the Council fleet was already forming a blockade. Their ships gleamed with the polished armor of a military that had ruled for centuries. The Alliance ships, in contrast, were a mix: human-built frigates, real interceptors, Theran war cruisers, and dozens of retrofitted freighters armed to the teeth. The first volley came from the Council. Long-range plasma fire streaked across the void, lighting up the darkness. The Alliance ships scattered, using asteroids and debris as cover. Elias's voice rang through the fleet comms. "No one fights alone. Pair up, cover each other, and keep them away from the gate." For 3 days, the battle raged. The Council tried to force their way through with sheer numbers, but the Alliance fought like wolves, small groups striking from unexpected angles, then vanishing before the enemy could lock on. The Ryle ships weaved through enemy lines, crippling engines and weapon systems before darting away. Theran war cruisers took the brunt of the heavy fire, holding the line while lighter ships flanked the Council's carriers. On the second day, the Council dreadnought made its push. It was a massive vessel, bristling with heavy cannons, and its forward assault threatened to break the Alliance formation. Elias made the call himself. The Resolute will engage the dreadnought. All other ships focus on their escorts. It was a gamble. His flagship was powerful, but no match for the dreadnought in a head-on fight. The clash was brutal. The Resolute took hit after hit, its shields flaring and buckling. The deck shook with every impact, consoles sparking as systems went down. Still, Elias held the ship on course, aiming for the dreadnought's weak points. "Target their starboard engine cluster," he ordered, voice steady despite the chaos. At close range, the Resolute's guns roared, pouring fire into the enemy ship. A Ryle squadron swooped in to support, strafing the dreadnought's hull and forcing it to divert fire. Slowly, piece by piece, the giant began to falter. When one of its engines finally exploded in a blossom of light, cheers erupted across the Alliance comms. The dreadnought began to drift, its massive bulk turning away from the gate. But victory was still far from certain. The Council's remaining ships launched a final desperate assault, throwing everything they had at the Alliance defenses. For hours, the two sides clashed in the shadow of the gate, neither willing to yield. Then, just as the Alliance lines began to buckle, reinforcements arrived, ships from the far side of the galaxy, racing through the gate to join the fight. With fresh forces pushing them back, the Council began to retreat. One by one, their ships pulled away, vanishing into hyperspace. The battle was over. The Alliance had held the gate. The cost was high. Dozens of ships were damaged or destroyed. Hundreds of lives had been lost. The Resolute limped away from the battlefield, its hull scorched and riddled with impact craters. But the victory meant more than territory. It meant the shattering of the Council's myth of invincibility. For centuries, they had been the unquestioned rulers of the galaxy, their fleets unbeatable. Now, everyone knew they could be stopped. As the debris drifted silently around the gate, Elias stood on the bridge, staring at the swirling vortex of its center. The gate was still theirs, and as long as it remained open to the Alliance, no part of their growing territory could be cut off. "Send the word," he told Mara quietly. "The Alliance holds, and we're not done yet." The message spread across the stars. On frontier worlds, in crowded spaceports, in the shadowed corners of lawless systems, people heard the news and felt something they hadn't felt in generations. Hope. The Council had thrown everything they had at the Deveris gate, and still the exiles stood. In the days that followed, more species sent envoys to the Alliance, offering treaties, resources, and ships. They had seen what humanity and its allies could do together, and they wanted to be part of it. The Alliance wasn't just surviving anymore. It was winning. And every victory drew more of the galaxy to their side. For Elias, the battle was proof of everything he had believed since the day of exile, that freedom was worth fighting for, that unity could grow from diversity, and that the Council's time as the galaxy's sole power was ending. The gate was more than a strategic prize now. It was a symbol a reminder that no matter how far they were pushed, humanity and the Alliance would always find a way to hold the line. Years passed after the victory at Deveris Gate, and the balance of power in the galaxy began to shift. The Outer Alliance, once a scattered group of exiles and outcasts, had grown into a force no one could ignore. Their territory spanned hundreds of worlds, their fleets guarded trade routes stretching across sectors, and their markets overflowed with goods the Galactic Council could no longer control. For the first time in centuries, the Council was forced to sit at a negotiating table with someone who wasn't afraid of them. The meeting was held on a neutral station in the Delta Perrin system, a place chosen because it belonged to neither side. The station floated above a golden gas giant, its curved towers gleaming in the light. Inside the central chamber, representatives of the Council waited, their robes pristine, their expressions carefully neutral. But their eyes betrayed unease. They had come here not to dictate terms, but to bargain, a position they were not used to. Elias entered with his delegation, flanked by leaders from the Real, the Theran, and several other allied species. They wore no formal robes, only the practical uniforms and armor of those who lived and worked among the stars. The difference in appearance was striking. One side polished and ceremonial, the other hardened and ready for action. The Grand Arbiter spoke first, her voice carrying the smooth tone of someone used to commanding the room. The Outer Alliance has grown far beyond its original settlements. You now hold territory once governed by the Council. This meeting is to determine the future of those regions. Elias met her gaze steadily. There's nothing to determine. Those regions are ours. We built them, defended them, and bled for them. You abandoned them long before we arrived. His words were plain, without any of the formal language the Council preferred, but they hit their mark. Murmurs spread among the Council representatives. For hours, the two sides debated. The Council demanded restrictions on Alliance expansion. The Alliance refused. The Council tried to frame themselves as protectors of galactic stability. Elias reminded them of the worlds they had left to die. Bit by bit, the Council's position weakened. They could not threaten war, not after their defeats. They could not demand the return of territory, not without losing face. In the end, they were forced to accept reality. A treaty was signed, recognizing the independence of the Outer Alliance and granting them control of all worlds and systems currently under their protection. It was a political surrender, even if the Council tried to disguise it as mutual agreement. When the treaty was complete, Elias walked out of the chamber into the bright light of the station's main hall. The other Alliance leaders were waiting, and when he gave a small nod, they knew. They had won. The Council had been forced to acknowledge them as equals. The news traveled faster than any ship. Across the galaxy, in the crowded streets of Alliance worlds and the dim corners of space stations, people celebrated. Fireworks lit up alien skies, and in deep space, entire fleets flashed their running lights in a show of unity. Back aboard the Resolute, Elias stood on the bridge, looking out at the stars. The crew moved quietly around him, giving him space. He thought back to the day of exile, the cold verdict of the Council, the humiliation of being cast out. That had been the moment the galaxy expected humanity to vanish. Instead, it had been the beginning of something greater. In the years that followed, the Alliance didn't stop growing. Freed from the need to defend every gain against the Council, they pushed deeper into the unknown. Explorers charted new systems, merchants opened fresh trade routes, and colonists settled worlds that had never known intelligent life. Each expansion brought new challenges, hostile environments, alien predators, and dangerous anomalies, but the Alliance thrived on challenges. The worlds of the Alliance became places of opportunity. On Vyra, the great markets drew traders from both Alliance and neutral worlds, the air filled with the sound of dozens of languages. On Eridan Prime, the first interspecies university opened, where human and alien scholars worked side by side. In the Sira system, the once dying Real now had a rebuilt capital city, its spires shining under a restored blue sky. The military remained strong, not for conquest, but for protection. The memory of the Council's attacks had not faded, and the Alliance kept its fleets ready. But there was a new sense of security now, a confidence that they were no longer the hunted. Even the Council, though still powerful, treated the Alliance with a wary respect. Elias often found himself traveling between worlds, meeting new settlers, listening to their stories. Some spoke of the hardships of starting fresh on alien soil. Others told of the joy of seeing their children grow up under skies that belonged to no empire but their own. These were the victories that didn't make it into official reports, the quiet, personal triumphs that proved exile had been a gift in disguise. One night, while the Resolute was cruising between sectors, Elias stood alone at the viewing window. The starfield stretched endlessly before him, a reminder of how much there was still to explore. Mara approached quietly and stood beside him. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if the Council hadn't exiled us?" she asked. Elias was silent for a long moment. "We'd still be sitting at their table, asking permission to breathe. We'd still be waiting for their approval to build, to explore, to live. They thought they were punishing us. Instead, they set us free." Mara smiled faintly. "And now?" "Now," Elias said, his eyes on the endless horizon of stars, "we see how far we can go before anyone dares to try and stop us again." The galaxy was vast, and the Alliance was still young. There would be new dangers, new enemies, and new tests of their unity. But one truth would never change. They had faced exile, defied the odds, and carved their name into the stars. The Council could no longer cage them, and wherever the next frontier lay, humanity and the alliance they had built would be there first.